The reaction to Boris Johnson's new asylum plan was very revealing. It exposed a lot of the so-called tolerant left for what they really are: close-minded, out-of-touch bigots. It also highlighted the fact that huge elements of the British media operate in a tiny Westminster bubble and don't have their finger on the pulse of the public mood. There was mass condemnation by the usual types for the Prime Minister's decision to put the Navy in the Channel and send single men who arrive illegally to Rwanda for processing. But the vast majority of the people who are outraged about this have never actually been confronted by the problems that our broken asylum system causes. It's easy for the EU flag-waving Open Borders Brigade in the southeast of England to have these grand ideas about throwing our arms open to the world and letting everybody stay while they sit around the fire pit of their landscape lawn and swill whatever vintage vino they've brought up from the wine cellar that particular evening. Why? Well, because they're not affected by the asylum crisis. Around 42% of asylum seekers are dispersed to the north of England in deprived areas like Rochdale and Middlesbrough, while just 6.5% are relocated in the south, excluding London, of course. Hugo from Hampstead can have all sorts of grand views, but Barry from Burnley has seen potentially his community change, the demographics of his local schools shift massively, increased pressure on his local health services, etc. But of course, Hugo thinks Barry is a small-minded racist for wanting greater asylum controls and lower immigration in general. There is, of course, a national security element to this as well, isn't there? According to social policy analyst Dr. Rakib Hassan, research shows that since 1998, 1/4 of all foreign nationals convicted of Islamist terror offences in Britain either claimed or were granted asylum over here. Now, the first job of a government is to protect its own citizens, and the Rwanda move is clearly an attempt to do just that. But I would like to make it very, very clear that for all of what I've just said there, I remain deeply sceptical about whether or not Boris Johnson's plan will work or actually be enforced. Why? Well, because time and time again, our government has talked tough and then done nothing. So I'm not exactly jumping for joy just yet. But back to those soppy southerners. A lot of them have exposed their own bigotry and racism. Well, we can't possibly send them to Rwanda, says Hugo. Well, why not? Well, I mean, it's in Africa, isn't it? And that's full of Africans. You know, well, go on, just expand on that for me, will you, Hugo? What's that? No, I didn't think so. Right, it's interesting, isn't it, as well? Because Tony Blair wanted to establish an asylum seeker camp in Africa in 2004. I wonder how many of the outraged lot would have been fine with the Rwanda deal if Blair had suggested it. Here's a picture of some of the accommodation that some asylum seekers will reportedly be staying in. And it looks relatively decent. Look, it certainly looks a lot better, doesn't it, I think, than what we've got inside a lot of the containment camps, as it were, or the disused bases that we're using here in some of our military areas. So, yes, there we go. Well, look, people are obviously also banging on about the cost of all of this. Well, the initial trial is set to cost around £120 million. Now, we're currently spending £5 million a day on hotel bills alone for asylum seekers in Britain, even if they arrived illegally. And think of the money we'll save if this acts as a deterrent. But just moving on to elements of the media now. Now, I get that loads of people want Boris Johnson to resign over Partygate, and I understand that the democratic process of scrutiny doesn't stop just because a big announcement has been made. But I think that there was a collective national groan yesterday when the second question, then the fourth question that Boris faced shortly after his announcement were about cake and cheese and wine and Partygate. People may disagree with me on this, but I think the vast majority of the British public care more about sorting out illegal immigration than they do about Partygate.